Hey, what's up? This is Remy Cooper and this is my studio. Today I will give a quick insight about how I did my remix for Tez Cadey's Driftin. So, Tez reached out to me a few months ago with the request to remix his song Driftin. Right after the original song was released, I got an Instagram direct message and I thought it was a really cool track, so I accepted it. Whenever I start a remix, I try not to listen to the original track too much. It keeps me from focusing in on the core elements and not copying the track too much. That's what I did with my previous remix for Lost Frequencies too. What I do listen for are the core elements of the tracks, which is usually a vocal. For this song I used a little bit more. I used the vocal, bass line, vibey guitar and lead section. So this is the whole track in Ableton Live 10. On the left side is my extended mix and on the right side I made the radio edit. This track gave me a real 90s vibe, which I really love. I started with changing the tempo and dragging in the right stems. So these are the stems I got. Often when I start a production, I start with making a drop. So let's focus in on the first drop of my extended remix. Let's have a look at the vocal, which is a really important part of the track. So this is the original vocal. And on top of that, I added my own octave above. On its own, it sounds a little bit weird, but when I add those two together, it sounds really natural and sticks out in a mix a little bit more. The kick is also very important for the track. I made my own kick with a low kick and a high kick. If I combine those two together, you get the whole kick. What I did with the processing of the kick is very simple, just a little bit EQ and a little bit of saturation. The next step is the bass. I used the original bass line in the drop and changed it up in the verses. Like I mentioned before, I really like the 90s vibe, so that's why I kept it. It's an M1 organ sound bass. I layered it with a sub. Also in this part I did a very subtle processing. Again, some saturation, EQing and some sidechaining. To add some character, I decided to add the Juno 106 VST. Those three basses together sound like this. In my opinion, this misses a longer bass to fill in the gaps of the notes. That's why I used my Moog Sub 37. So this is them all together. For me, these are the fundamentals of the track. So now let's add some groove. Whenever I create my drums, I often use the push 2. I really like the workflow of it. So in this instance, I used heads, snares, claps. Here are some rides, crashes, shakers and some top loops. I like to use more modern sounds and combine them with more characterful, old school vintage sounds. So the next elements are melodic and harmonic elements. I recreated the lead sound. I used the original sound to make my own version of it. It used to sound like this. I chopped it up and this is the melody I made. Again, some simple processing, some EQing. I used the RC20, which I really like to give some wobble and noise. And finally, some simple compression and sidechaining. In almost every production of mine, I use a drone note. Often a string which plays the root note of my song. These are my harmonic elements. So I use pianos and 2 Juno VSTs. On the end of a project, it's often very heavy on my CPU. That's why I freeze all my tracks. For the pianos, I used an instrument rack. I've used a Nexus 2 piano, M1, which is a classic, and an Omnisphere for the realism. The processing is again very easy. Some EQing, my favorite 80s reverb, some sidechaining, filtering and automation. On top of these pianos are my Juno VSTs. These are there for some extra character on the pianos. So besides some effects, these are all the elements from the drop. So let's have a look at the break section. Besides the original vocal, I added a vocoder. They both sound like this together.
No, I would risk it all, so tell me where to go tonight.
It makes the vocal a little bit wider and it gives an extra tone. There's also an extra arp introduced. The chords are exactly the same as the vocoder. Together they sound like this.
Tell me where to go tonight.
A little tip, I sidechain those chords, those RP chords, to the vocal. It gives a little bit more space for the vocal and the vocoder. Another important element is the vibey guitar sample. I did some simple processing and a lot of automations. In this section of the song, another bass line is introduced. It's almost the same sound as the bass I used in the drop. I used the same sub above it, only a different rhythm. And again, my Moog synthesizer. So, here you have it. These are all my remix elements. If you have any questions regarding the production, please let me know. Thanks for watching.